Hi everyone, I'm Hima Batavia and we are going live today with Javid Jah, who is an interdisciplinary artist and the artist who led the second episode of Desire Paths. So we're just waiting for him to join and then we're just going to talk a little bit about the episode and what to expect and what were some of the takeaways.
Hello.
Hey,
Hey, how are you?
I'm pretty good. How are you doing?
Not bad, not bad.
Thanks for joining us today.
Yes, thanks for the invite. Appreciate it.
Well, I know this has been a pretty intense week. Uh, want to give a shout out to our Asian brothers and sisters and in solidarity with them.
But
Um, we also launched the second episode of Desire Paths this week, which you are the lead artist on, and want to share a lot of gratitude for you joining us
thank
in
you.
this journey and this process of audio creation and visioning and futuring. For everyone joining, I'm Hima Batavia. I'm one of the co-curators on the project, and it's been a real joy. And the second episode just launched, as I mentioned. It's on futures of sacred space. And Javid really leads the process of imagining futures of sacred space in Toronto, and then goes into conversation with Reverend Michelle Singh to go deeper into what those futures could look like. So we're here today to chat a little bit about the episode. Javid, do you want to introduce yourself? Just let folks know about your practice and your background.
Yeah, sure. I'm really grateful for this opportunity. Thank you, Hima. And I've been in Toronto. I'm born in Toronto, and I kind of have a practice that's attempting to fuse visual art and in the form of murals and public artworks, and increasingly installations, and mix it with architectural exploration. As I do practice with an architecture firm. We do sustainable homes, most of them made out of shipping containers. So that kind of practice collided with my explorations of sacred geometries and Islamic arts. And each project is really a new intersection of those two worlds, one more dealing with surface and the other dealing with space. And so it kind of led me to thinking more about, I think, because it's my practice is very intertwined with my tradition as someone from an esoteric Islamic faith. And so it just led me to this idea of the sacred and constantly questioning the sacred. And I've been reading for a number of years the work of Sayyid Hussein Nasr, who is a world leader in this idea of how do we define the sacred and how it relates to the natural world, and connecting that with cosmology and seeing this idea that within every human is a universe. And so I guess my practice touches a lot of different things, but really it is focused on this idea of how do we bring the sacred into manifest it into our real world experience, physical experience.
Yeah. I mean, I feel so much gratitude for having been able to learn from you and listen to you and especially like the depth of your practice and yeah, anyone who has a chance to spend time with you, I think is like really lucky and is
Thank you so much.
will deepen their own spiritual path. But there's something that you talked about in the episode around the three stages of connecting to the sacred. And I was
Mm,
wondering if you could share that and a little bit where the origin of that is from.
for sure. I also want to just acknowledge that it really means a lot when somebody asks the questions that you've been asking, and the team as a whole. Like it's one thing to have these thoughts, and sometimes there's this line where when you're dealing with matters that let's say, as I've said, fail to be expressed in words, we keep them, they're private, and we don't acknowledge them and talk about them. And in some tradition that I've learned, like speaking about spirituality might cause you to lose it, or trying to express what that feeling of light is and stuff. So um, I like to think about metaphysics or talking about a reality past the physical environment as something that we can find common ground to discuss. But I really acknowledge the importance of the questions you ask as like being a way to find a channel
Mm.
to put them out. Because sometimes art projects, they have a write-up, maybe people don't read it, but the art projects are dealing with stuff that we don't always get to talk about like this. So thank you for that. In regards to that story, that legend, the Sufi legend, yeah, that three stages is interesting. I think, in essence, like in the short version of it is, you have three stages of your journey if you are trying to seek your origin, the origin of your soul, where you come from, and generally where all creation comes from. The first stage, you are drawn towards beauty, Jamal in Arabic. You're drawn towards things that physically and mentally stimulate you and are wonderful. And regardless of even ethics, you're drawn to. It could be a flower, it could be a song, whatever. But in the second stage, as you go, you become more irritated by things that aren't beautiful, things that we could call the profane, things that are just like ugly in a certain sense, and without even being able to qualify and judge what that is, since it is a subjective thing. But we're irritated by things that, let's say, don't appeal to us the same way. But in the third stage of this journey, there is this kind of obliteration of this polarization of things. You kind of you lose sight of the fact that one thing is ugly and another thing is beautiful, and you are embracing the fact that all things came from the same place. You can't understand. We often forget that our own experience of reality is a lens, is seen through a lens of our own perception, and that perception is not the reality itself. It's just one layer of it. And so I guess this leads to another saying by Junaid, where he said that the color of water is determined by the vessel that holds it. And so understanding that you are that vessel and that you may not be seeing the actual color of the water is an important stage in this journey towards the sacred.
Mm. Yeah, I've been reflecting around about that a lot, actually. And somebody in the chat just wrote divine paradox.
Yes.
And how we're always living that paradox. But I think the way that we're living it right now, the divinity feels more clear to see. Whether it's like a pandemic that is allowing us to reconnect to what we truly care about and what we want to prioritize, whether it's, hate violence leading to solidarity and people awakening in different ways. So I certainly am feeling that paradox really really potently right now.
Yeah, paradox is a really important word, and one of the things we talked about a lot of stuff in the conversation, and as I was listening to it, I was like, oh wow, I wish that part was in it, I wish that part was in it. But like, I know you can't, and one of those words, like paradox, reminds me of this word perplexity, which is a really important word in the tradition of Ibn Arabi, who's known as the master, like the great master of all kind of Sufi cosmology and thinking. And one thing that he wrote about, which is really important in terms of perplexity, is this idea where there's a certain point where your mind cannot process further. It hits a kind of a dead end. It's trying to understand, like, how does a tree continue to every year lose its leaves? It looks like it's dying, and then the next year it comes back to life. How does this tree have constancy and change at the same time? And perplexity is the moment where those two driving forces, or those two realities clash. And there is this kind of point where your mind stops and your heart takes over. Your heart, the intelligence of the heart, the brain in our heart. And this idea of the heart, not necessarily anatomical, but the center of yourself, is really important, because when you hit that moment, there is a kind of opening up to this world of imagination, this kind of opening up to a guidance or a source of abundance that really is limited when we're trying to rationalize everything. Yeah. So perplexity is inherently related to paradox, and a really important word for those in their search.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So for those that joining in, Javid and I spent time at 4 locations in Toronto. The last location unfortunately didn't make it into the episode, but I'll share it just in case you want to visit it. But the first place we went to was Keele Station, and exploring the subway as a site for sacredness and exploring our connection with our own solitude. We then went to Kensington Market, where Javid has a strong connection to, and also has these like interesting representations of the sacred. We then went to the Medina Masjid on the Danforth, where Javid did a project inside the masjid painting the dome, which was a 1,000-hour project that brought in sacred geometries. And then the last place that we went to was the Sundial Folly, which is down at Harbourfront, and is a public art piece, and brings in the technology of the sundial for folks to experience. So I'm wondering, what was this experience like for you? And, was there, in going to all these places, what did you kind of take away in terms of how you've thought about sacred space in Toronto and how you are continuing to sort of think of Toronto?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, it was quite a journey that day to go to all four of those places. And they all, to me, they're like the solstices and equinoxes on the solar orbit. There's the moment of extreme cold, extreme heat, and then two balanced moments. I feel like the subway is this extreme kind of almost lonely, cold place. And then Sundial Foley on the water is this warm, reflective environment, and kind of Kensington and the mosque are places where you can find balance with or without people, But I think that it reminds me when we in the audiobook we have a conversation with Reverend Michelle Singh, who is an interfaith minister, and we had a moment where I was like, listen, even though the sacred requires the individual as much as city builders to bring to life, in a city like Toronto, I don't feel like there are enough reminders compared to other cities that I feel that are flooded with them. Reminders of the origin, reminders of the divine, so-called gateways to the sacred. And she took the opposite position. She's like, no, actually, every time I roam the city, I bump into something that reminds me. And she cited Peace Park, which is a really interesting place. And so during that journey, I started to think differently too. Like, Sundial Foley, I think is probably the most slept on public artwork in our city, maybe. But I do think that Toronto is turning a corner, and we can, as long as we intend to continue to turn a corner and start to think about cultivating spaces. Like another thing that Michelle said that was really important is the idea that anything that we create, whether or not it relates to a sacred tradition, should have an aspect of nature into it. It should have a pool or some kind of like a centering on a natural environment within the built environment. And I think we're getting towards that. We're trying to do that. So I think there's some kind of awakening happening, or maybe I just like to stay positive. I don't know. So that was good. It was a good journey to go around the city to those 4 points and reflect on what they mean.
Yeah, and kind of listening to your conversation together, some of the things that I reflected on was I know you mentioned this a few times, like in our field trip, of like, often in connecting with the sacred, it does have to start with the individual. Like in many cases, like when you connect with the sacred within, you start to see it everywhere, right? Everything can be seen to have a sacred quality. But of course, like people are at all different places in their journey. They can be at different places in their journey on a single day, right? Mm-hmm. And so how do we create different options for people, who may need it to be more explicit, or who may need reminders in a certain way? Or how do we use language as a way to inspire people to see the sacred? Right. And I think when I think about it that way, it doesn't feel like Toronto has been shaped around that, where there's this like explicit nature, this invitation into the sacred for those at different places in their journey or at different points in their day, where they can have like a moment to stop and of respite. And I also, one of the things that I loved about what you shared is kind of the conversation around this myth of the secular. Mm-hmm. And this constant sort of, narrative that we use around inclusivity, and what is that actually, and how might we evolve that story about ourselves as a city and as a community, to actually create space for the sacred, and the sacred that comes from, different traditions, different ancient traditions, ancestral traditions. So I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about your point of view around the secular and how we might shift that narrative.
Well, it's interesting as you say that. I see that Saima just joined us, and Saima, I don't know if you know Saima.
I do know Saima. Hi,
Oh, you
Saima.
know, yeah. So, Saima curates art programs at Union, and there was an invitation to me this past year during the pandemic to do a passive exhibit outside of Union, and I think that's a great example of a secular institution that is creating a platform for an artist of a particular tradition to express and showcase their work. And I think that we're searching for that. I don't know if we have to always wait for extreme moments where a certain minority or invisible community, even though visible minority, but an invisible community, is facing some kind of mainstream oppressive situation for them to finally get a chance to be in spotlight. And I think that in a certain sense, as artists, we're searching for a kind of a visibility, but what kind of sacrifices are we trying to make in our art for that visibility? Like, what are we going to give up for that just to be accepted and to fit into? Because at the end of the day, a lot of art commissions come from corporate money, much more than they do from public money. So, we're slowly only getting to the point where, Street Art Toronto is doing some much major monumental commissions, and even of international artists. But otherwise, public art is the main projects are either like this 1% model where you build a tower and 1% has to be put into public art. And you generally are not going to get an expression there that is embedded in faith unless it's embedded in this kind of post-colonial, post-Christian, post-Eurocentric view of secularism, which claims to be neutral but is quite far from that in actual fact. So I think a lot of it has to do with people of color, people from this diverse city of Toronto being in positions as gatekeepers, being in influential positions where they can actually say something about a policy or a mandate and go through the proper, I don't know, the way of actually bringing it to life. And it's one thing to talk about it, but actually to have it there as this is the mandate for this public artwork. And so slowly we have more people from different backgrounds who understand the importance of their traditional representation symbols in places of power to say, yeah, okay, let's let this voice be heard. Otherwise, it's best to take to the streets, and that's why graffiti will always reign supreme.
Yeah, I remember, just to that point, I remember one of the things you said when we were sort of closing out the field trip and we were at the waterfront. This didn't make it into the episode, but often we like these sort of systems and these like public art committees, like the idea and thinking behind inclusive is like you don't want anyone to feel left out, right? You don't want people to feel like, oh, well, that's not my faith, or that's not my religion, or I don't see myself in it. And that being like the reason why these like faith specific or from certain traditions are not given permanent space and permanent visibility. And I remember you saying like, why can't you see something that you may not understand and see it as an invitation, an invitation to learn and be curious and explore a different faith and explore a different tradition, and not be threatened by it.
I mean, and that's what Reverend Michelle Singh really, she really solidified it in our conversation. This idea of not just tolerance of another faith, but this invitation, like I want to learn about, it might be a little bit of discomfort at first, but like the Aga Khan always discusses about pluralism. And if you really reflect on what pluralism is, it's not just that there is a demographic diversity, it's that there is a space to celebrate the expressions of that diversity. If we had a city like Toronto and the adhan, like the call for prayer, was being belted out at Dundas Square, I would love to just watch. I wish there's a bunch of hidden cameras and watch people's responses. I'm sure some people would just give me these curious looks like, what is this? Is like 9/11 about to happen? And other people just be like, wow, I have no idea what is being said, but I can feel the love and the power in this voice, you know? And I think so we have to get over that conversation of like, okay, yeah, there might be discomfort because I mean, like I said the biggest point of contention really is that there is so few representations of indigenous voices in the land that we're settled in. You know, and over the last year or two, that's really occurred to me. I've reached out to various Anishinaabe artists and knowledge keepers to guide me. Like, how can I work to learn about this tradition? One of the people I look up to very much, his name is Frithjof Schuon. He was a Sufi from Switzerland, and he was welcomed into the Plains Indians of they were situated in the land of the United States there, and they initiated into him without even them knowing anything of him because they felt his energy. They knew that their traditions were aligned and universal, despite the fact that one was from that they were from completely different faiths. And so that's that perennial philosophy, that universal understanding that is the real sacred that I'm trying to talk about, which is that all these divisions are really just your perceptions. We all have the same origin. We all share that, and any manifestation of it is legitimate. And so I think it's really important to make sure that we create more platforms for people to honestly express where they're coming from and where they're at, and not have this fear of discomfort. Because the festival is insignificant. I think the festivals are great. Don't get me wrong. I love Toronto and festival season, but everything is so fleeting. And you could argue, well, all art is one sense is transient and fleeting and all this kind of stuff. But I think having actual spaces, centers in brick and mortar that you can flock to, that you can go to, that gatherings can be, you know, in the first episode of your series, there's a great discussion about that from between the artist and the architect.
Yeah, Midnight Wolverine.
Yeah, there's a really great discussion about this conversation about what does it mean to make ceremonial space in the city. Great conversation.
Yeah, actually both of the episodes they speak a little bit to that. So thank you so much for this gift to the series, to the city, to bringing to starting to speak more about the sacred in our city and creating space for it. I hope you all got a taste of what to expect. You can find the episode on all podcast platforms. And yeah, much love to you, Javid.
Thank you so much, Hima, and the whole team, like Macy, Robert, Jeremy, Alex, Luminato. I want to thank all those individuals for this opportunity and the energy and to tell this story. So, I really look forward to people's feedback from it. It's 49 minutes, but it's kind of still a pandemic. I hope you make some time.
Yeah, it's a great episode to go for a walk and listen to and imagine futures of the city and where the sacred would find itself in the city. And please share your feedback with us and continue the conversation.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Day and weekend.
All right. Peace. Happy Friday. One love.